For sure. Thanks, everybody, for joining. This will be uploaded on our YouTube channel, as always. And I'm Congrejo with the Particl Project. I'm here today with Dr. Cap, all-around fascinating man. How are you today, my friend?
I'm doing good, man. I just woke up from a good nap, much like yourself. So when we were doing the little pre-meet earlier, I was like, oh, I don't have the energy. But now the energy's gradually getting back to me as I prepare my cats some food.
Yes, I was hearing them purr earlier, and we also had a small conversation about CBDCs, which might come up.
It's funny you say that. I was going to ask you when you were on the pre-call, I was like, can you hear the sound of heavy breathing? Because that's not me wanking. That is actually my cat on my chest, purring away at the most inconvenient time. Literally minutes before you called, my baby was just like screaming. It's like, okay, here we go. But yeah, no, the CBDC conversation was pretty interesting, and it really ties into what we're going to be discussing today, which is anonymity, regulation, and resilience. But yeah, I want you to take the lead on that one, man. What are your thoughts there? What have you been?
For sure. Also, you had a funny line about cheating on Bitcoin when we brainstormed for this one. Do you remember what that was?
Oh yeah. So I mean, my crypto wife says she loves Bitcoin, but she's secretly doing Litecoin behind its back.
There it is.
I think that just reflects the fact that if you look at transactions that are being used, if you look at what's actually being used from a transaction point of view, what's actually being used as a currency, certainly in purest crypto terms, it is Litecoin over Bitcoin by a very long way. I would love to know how many Bitcoin maxis secretly use Litecoin as their currency of choice without necessarily giving that game away. And I simply say that because, I think for a long time, or a longer time than I realized, Litecoin was very much just a public blockchain. But in recent years, they have made some real strides towards incorporating privacy. So they have developed a nice implementation of Mimblewimble, which effectively hides balancers, senders, and receivers. Now, when I say elegant, effectively, it's almost as if they have two chains running in parallel. Their standard public ledger, which is the Litecoin public ledger, and then the Litecoin Mimblewimble ledger. I don't know if you can really call Mimblewimble ledgers. It's a bit more complicated when you look into it. It's an interesting one, yes. Yeah, it's an interesting one, but they essentially run in parallel. And when you transfer, what's actually happening is you're effectively, when you convert from a public Litecoin balance to a Mimblewimble balance, you're effectively transferring from the public ledger to this private ledger, which runs in parallel. And when you convert from the private ledger to the public ledger, you're effectively transferring liquidity back. So I find it interesting. I think we call Litecoin a cryptocurrency, and I think that is definitely, it's very much a cryptocurrency, and it's very much a currency in its purer forms. But to call it a distributed ledger is slightly misleading. It's more like distributed ledgers running in parallel, and I think that's quite elegant how they've achieved privacy and built into that without necessarily having to rework huge
I think Schnorr signatures, I don't know if you've read a bit about those, but they're extremely interesting for privacy. Most blockchains use ECDSA curves, and Schnorr signatures really allow you to do stuff that ECDSAs don't. And the reason they didn't use Schnorr signatures to begin with was because it was patented, which is interesting in its own right.
Okay. Well, that is really interesting. So did they just pay for the patents? Are they still using it? That's one thing I wasn't.
I believe it expired.
Okay, fine. So that's why they went ahead. Because I remember this. Here's the thing. I remember years ago they were talking about using confidential transactions. So I remember really sort of about, I think it's 2018, 2019, earlier than that maybe. But yeah, I think I need to have a more detailed dive in. Anyway, why are we mentioning this? I think it's partly because
It sort of does tie into the decentralized and centralized. I've always thought Schnorr signatures were pretty ridiculous. Being patented was quite ridiculous. But to our topic, something that I was very fascinated by, and something that I haven't heard your thoughts too much about, and I was curious about, is sort of this relationship itself between centralized and decentralized services. Obviously, we're all the way team decentralized here. But we know one can sort of feed into one another, and the switch between the user-based, the levels of convenience, it's a gradual process. And I'm wondering your thoughts on that. Are these two things meant to coexist, or is decentralized meant to crush centralized in the long run?
I mean, let's look at the evidence like right now. It's interesting you actually mentioned patent. So I guess patent versus off patent, decentralized versus centralized, closed source versus open source. They're essentially they are multiple. There are three distinct applications of the same underlying principle, which is controlled and permissioned versus unpermissioned or depermissioned, and open. And that's, look, we live in a world where they coexist. Let's look at the world as it is. Large chunk of the world's server architecture uses, Linux or Unix, essentially Unix. But then actually there is a lot of server architecture that uses Windows, which is closed, which is a closed-sourced, privately published software. So I think coexistence is very much a thing that happens. It's interesting you mentioned that Schwarz signatures are patented. I had no idea. I'll be honest with you, I really had. I should actually know better. I should be a bit more informed, so I'm just going to own it there. And I'll probably, after this, I'm going to read up a little bit more on that. Why anyone would patent it? Yeah, why anyone would patent a technology like that? I assume that maybe they wanted to sell it off to the Department of Defense or some military contractor, or find someone who wanted to use it and they wanted to license it in some way. But the problem is, when you develop a highly esoteric niche technology, particularly one that's software based, then when you decide to make it closed sourced and when you decide to apply patents, you're doing two things. One, you are reducing the availability to inspect and audit that code for vulnerabilities, loopholes, exploits, to ensure that it does do what it says safely and as intended. And then B, I almost lost my thought there, but that's the main thing, is you're making the code base closed source for one thing, and that reduces that. And then you're expecting someone to pay for the privilege of using this technology, which essentially has the "Trust Me Bro" label slapped on it, to someone who doesn't necessarily understand that esoteric niche things. I think it's very easy to patent things where the underlying technology and method of production are easy to understand to a larger audience, but the smaller that audience becomes, the harder it then becomes for you to adopt, to trust, because you are reliant on trust. And okay, you can pay someone to analyze that code and then they can sign an NDA, but then you don't really know what these two parties have talked about. So when it comes to something that involves extremely sensitive, Schwarz signatures, that essentially involves cryptography. Cryptography is fundamentally about security. So if you decide to make something like that private and closed sourced and dependent on financial acquisition via patents, or the usage of it dependent on financial acquisitions via patent, then you're really narrowing the scope of potential buyers. So I don't know if that's the smartest business decision, but what I would say is, indirectly, I've just pointed out, how you go about deciding whether it's worth commercializing or patenting something or not. If you've got a specific interest in controlling the ownership and distribution of that technology, and the terms under which that technology is distributed in such a way that you can profit, then go ahead and patent something. But please be mindful of the fact that if it is incredibly niche and esoteric, you can patent it all you want, it's your innovation, but no one may want to touch it afterwards until the patents expire and until people can have a closer look. So I think that's my take on that.
It's really closer to because it is cryptography, as you mentioned. It's really closer to math than it is coding. It's sort of like patenting the square root of 16 or something, in my view.
Well, it's interesting you say this. The United States, I don't allow this in the UK, but in the United States, you can patent genetic sequences. If you privately manufactured them, you can actually patent sequences of genomic material, which sounds ridiculous, really, because if you've patented a sequence of genomic material, and guarantee you, particularly if it relates to, a protein, it's not protein, particularly if it relates to something that can be coded or produced by the human body, you're bound to have individuals walking around who have effectively had portions of their DNA privatized. Which is a really bizarre and ridiculous concept. Now, the US law is structured in such a way that, at least at this time, that person walking around unintentionally carrying that sequence of DNA, if it happens to fall under the remit of a US patent on that particular sequence of genome, well, they can't be sued because they already had it. But they can't use that sequence, even though they were born with it. They can't then extract that sequence and use it for commercial purposes without actually acquiring permission or patent from the patent holder or the patent rights, which is really bizarre.
Yes, it's an interesting relationship between centralization and the patent as the agent of centralization, sort of, a little bit.
Yeah. And, from that point of view, I would say, you could argue using that example that, a US citizen effectively has an aspect of their bodily autonomy taken away from them by the very existence of patents on genomics being allowed, because they can't use something that's fundamentally intrinsic to them for commercial purposes, which I would argue is anti-capitalist, which is ironic because the patent system was conceived of to help further the cause of capitalism. In part, it was help, not completely, but one of the aims was to help, incentivize financially, or to financially incentivize innovation by protecting the innovators and by ensuring that they could financially profit from successful inventions. So I think that it's a really interesting, I don't like the word paradox. It almost feels like a paradox, but it's not. It's a really interesting caveat.
And you might have heard something, I think it was about 10 years ago, Monsanto, a very giant genetic engineering firm in the US, they actually sued farmers because some of the genetic code that they encoded turned out in their crops. And I believe they even won some litigation on the basis of that.
So they actually won. Well, that's interesting. I mean, the very idea of patenting genomic code is interesting because there's crossover, there's leakage, there's sharing. If you look at the biology of, if you look at how genomic material crosses over between organisms of the same species and even between organisms of totally different species, if you look at all the underlying processes, it's an inevitability. It's not a case of if, but when. That's how I look at it. That's how you get transformation of viruses or diseases that would be, or viruses that would be exclusively in a particular strain of animals. That's how they can sometimes cross over to affect humans. Crossover of genetic material, it is extremely difficult to contain that when you look at biological processes in depth. And it's funny because actually, I guess in some ways you could argue the same thing about code. Because patents can only cover so much of the world. They can't cover the entire planet unless you have the resources to take out patents globally. And you can. It's an expensive process. But just going back into the idea of code, you could miss a country and then the code base, for whatever reason, leaks out, suddenly the source code leaks. You mentioned the Windows, was it the Windows XP source code was leaked 10 years after launch in a little pre-discussion. And then, well, now all that code's floating around. I mean, I don't know if it's still under any license or if Microsoft cares to enforce it or whoever the holders are. But if there is a nation which they haven't, taken out patent rights in, there's nothing stopping the citizens of that nation building off that code.
Yes, yeah.
And then, well, once you've built your application and you've spread it around, it's very difficult to then stop the propagation of an application because we have so many networks. I remember what you mentioned. You wanted us to talk about the Tor network, peer-to-peer file sharing networks.
Yes.
Before, I think a week ago when we had like another discussion relating to this. And, it's like, okay, well, I've released an application now. We have tons of peer-to-peer networks that are privacy focused and not so privacy focused that enable rapid propagation of software. So then it just becomes a function of marketing and awareness. So, I think keeping genies in a bottle is very difficult, even under the current patent system. It's possible, but it's harder because the world we live in facilitates information networks of greater density, of greater liquidity. By liquidity, I mean the ability to exchange back and forth, and density, the amount of information we share. That's gone up exponentially on our data networks over the last 20, 30 years. So it is harder to enforce patent rights. And I think there are real questions around whether you should, and whether you even need to, and whether it's even worthwhile taking a patent. It all floats back around to that in this roundabout way. But yeah.
Yeah, it's it seems it would be easiest in a completely centralized world, and then it would be harder in a truly multipolar world. And then the decentralized ideal would sort of be the next step from that, where I think the resilience behind decentralization very much shines through.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. Do you say that we could live in an exclusively decentralized world? I mean, if you look at the world right now, it is a mixture of things. It is both has patented technology and non-patented technology, open source technology, closed source technology, centralized elements, decentralized elements. But it's funny you mentioned the word multipolar, because really, in my vocabulary, that wasn't, my vocabulary in geopolitical thinking. That's not really something that came to my mind or consciousness until just checking this cat food's not gone off. Sorry, I'm preparing. These cats are waiting patiently. But yeah, multipolar, it's not a word that really entered my geopolitical consciousness properly until 2 years ago, and has felt a lot more relevant in the last year. And I'm going to call it decentralization drift, because you kind of said it, and we kind of just said it. We kind of given the answer here, which is that as you introduce technologies that facilitate and permit greater amounts of data sharing and permit and facilitate freer and more diverse forms of data sharing, then the likelihood of data being shared tends towards inevitable. And so any centralized attempt to control it becomes harder. So then we drift from centralized control towards more decentralization. And it's funny that, the US spent 30, 40 years fighting for a unipolar war, actually more than that, post-World War II. Essentially, the US has essentially fought for a unipolar world.
They're still going.
They're still going and they're still trying, but the overwhelming current right now, even by acknowledgement of some of their own higher-ups, is towards a multipolar world. And if you look at the actions of the US, issuing God knows how many trillions, if you look at their debt profile, it's the last 2 years where it's just gone up like exponentially. It's just done a big green dildo candle and gone up 1,000%. If you look, it's really funny. Before the Iraq War, in Clinton's time, the US operated on a $6 trillion dollar surplus. I think it's $6 trillion surplus. They had a surplus in terms of their federal
under
budget.
Clinton, yes.
Under Clinton, and after all of these wars that were meant to maintain, well, I presume, I don't know, after the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, the whatever war, basically a bunch of wars that for in the Middle East and a bunch of wars for a bunch of oil that were really just to fund the ambitions of a bunch of oil companies, a bunch of arms companies, in the name of maintaining USD hegemony. Basically, maintaining the attempt to maintain unipolarity has driven the US into a ridiculous debt, from which, and at the same time, it hasn't stopped the world from becoming multipolar. It hasn't stopped the rise of China and Indian industrialization. Yes. It hasn't stopped the rise of new superpowers or new regional entities. And what am I trying to say from all of that is, well, I feel like I'm losing myself in my own thoughts here. But what I'm basically trying to say from that is, we are moving towards a multipolar world. Decentralization is inevitable. It feels to me like that is inevitable as a consequence of increasing the ways in which we're able to communicate. Just advances in internet technology have permitted advances in data sharing, advances in media, advances in all kinds of things if you really think about it. But ultimately, the underlying theme is information theory and data sharing. And the more powerful you make that, the harder it is to maintain centralized control. And sorry, going back to that, yes, the US, in the most of their debt's been issued now in the last 2 years. And if you look at I think it's 30 trillion, whatever, it's a stupid amount of money they printed off. About 1 trillion of that is set aside to build renewables for the US so that they no longer have to remain energy dependent on the Middle East for oil, or Russia for gas, or other nations for other forms of energy. They're trying to achieve energy independence. And if you're trying to achieve energy independence, what that effectively means is, energy independence is the first step towards building a truly independent industrial base, because you can electrify and power everything. So the US is now basically trying to become a self-sufficient nation. And it will succeed because the underlying technology there is there. The consequence of this is that the USD will probably no longer be the world's reserve. The centralization of currency power into the USD will no longer remain centralized to the USD. It will decentralize into other currencies. It will probably decentralize, I don't know which ones. It could be the Chinese yuan. It's not going to be, it could be, the Indian rupee. Who knows? Who knows? I don't really care in some ways. All we're acknowledging is that, or the Russian ruble, all we're acknowledging is that different countries are making the active decision to no longer use the USD as an intermediary step in their foreign currency exchanges. That's the simplicity of it. So we're decentralizing away from the USD as an essential component of transactional trade, as an essential component of liquidity trade. That's all.
I'd like to go back to something you said about the realpolitik sort of way, where real power is projected by the United States. I'm thinking especially maybe 40 years ago. And today we have, I think, especially in the context of Particl and of all those decentralized projects that we're fans of or associated with, we really have a unique and very new opportunity to use that decentralization and that anonymity to sort of hoist a bulwark in front of that real power, where it doesn't really matter if, anarchists sometimes say that laws are always under you have to obey law, always under threat of violence, is I think a common libertarian perspective. And here we have
No, carry on, man. Sorry. I was going to say violence is the last resort of any. The violence is the last resort of any Well, it's the first resort of most despots, and it's the last resort of any government. It is, it's not currency that is the underlying tool of coercion for any governance structure. It is always the threat of violence in some form. It doesn't have to be physical violence. It could be, it is the threat of coercion, essentially. Coercion.
And I suppose my point to that effect would be in the same sense that we were talking about how, different in the context of a multipolar world, possibly leading to a decentralized world. You have something like the rise of, the Chinese-Russian alliance as far as military goes. I don't know if China were to invade Taiwan in 5 years, I don't know where that would leave the U.S. But that's certainly a threat to unipolarity of the United States hegemony. But another threat, I think, is this more completely dissipated, decentralized, and anonymous way of simply not really giving a shit about what that violence is what threats those rules are sort of implying, because you have the tools to obfuscate it in a much more passive way.
Yeah. So I want to just pick up on something, because I agree with you on everything you've just said. But it's been said before. One thing I want to pick up on what you said is China invading Taiwan. It's really funny you mentioned this. Last night, I was holding my newborn, well, it's a couple of months old now. I was holding my baby in my arms, yes. And I was bored out of my mind. Yeah, I know. He's cute. He's super adorable, but still at the age where, you've got to kind of find ways to entertain yourself. So on YouTube, using a centralized entity on a decentralized network, the internet, I was watching a 10-minute talk on why it's not likely that China is going to invade Taiwan, or why it's much less likely than people thought. And funnily enough, and their argument was, they basically pointed out how Xi Jinping, I pronounced that wrong, I apologize, I'm terrible at this. But basically the Chinese premier expunged, i.e. removed several very high-ranking members of the Chinese Communist Party. Among them, I think one of them was, the defense minister, and another one was another higher up who was in charge of sort of strategic geopolitical strategy. I can't remember the names. Why did he do it? Sure. Well, the reason is because they basically found out that large stocks of their missile reserves, instead of these missiles containing fuel in the fuel tanks of these missiles was water. And that Chinese generals and commanders and forces, had been actively using the fuel in these missiles. They'd actually been using it to cook stew, because it didn't burn it didn't give off a certain flavor when it burned, and it didn't affect the taste of the stew. It's ridiculous. But what I'm getting at is that it's ridiculous. But the implication of that video was actually that China, their military might not be as ready for an armed conflict as the Chinese government currently thought it was, and they have some corruption cleaning to do. And that's the point, was that there's corruption. If you want to really challenge a hegemony, if you want to challenge a hegemonic power, the first thing as a nation, as an up-and-coming nation, if you want to challenge the status quo, if you want a meaningful shot at this, you have to deal with the corruption in your own backyard. You cannot succeed as a small up-and-coming nation. You cannot get into a position where you can challenge an established hegemony until you clean up your own corruption. Now, it's funny, because I know there are lots of people who might one day listen to this. I know we don't have that many in the audience, but there may be people who listen to this and go, well, hang on, isn't the US incredibly corrupt? Well, it is, yes. In many ways, the US government is very corrupt. I'm not denying that. But then relative to other countries, it's not so bad. Anyone who knows me well knows that I bitch about the UK a hell of a lot. But at least here, the corruption that has become rampantly apparent in the last few years, at least that's out in the open in such a way that at least there are some systems in place to genuinely go after these people who are committing the corruption and ensure that they can potentially suffer the consequences of that. And it doesn't always work. I mean, I don't want to have a rant about Boris Johnson right now, or a number of other figures who are incredibly corrupt, in my opinion. And I'm sure you can say the same across the pond in the United States. But what I'm trying to say to you is, relative to other nations, there are a lot of robust systems in place to minimize that corruption and to take action when corruption occurs. And that's not only within the structures of government, but within the structures of media. And yes, people are going to go, yes, the government is corrupt. Yes, the media is corrupt. Yeah, every system is potentially fallible, but it's all about relativity. So if my up and coming nation, relative to the existing hegemony, is much more corrupt on a much more fundamental level, to the point that my missiles are loaded with, my missile silos are loaded with missiles that have water in their fuel tanks instead of fuel, then you can't run a country like that if you lack that much trust. If everything is that screwed up, that every assumption you make about how your country works on a top level, if you're using a top-down structure, which is what centralized structures are, they are essentially top-down structures. If every assumption you have from the top about every other layer beneath you is wrong, you can't run a government, you can't run a country, you can't grow. That's the reality of it.
I find it interesting when you say, it's more sort of out in the open. My first instinct was to think of class incentives or something like that. But I think something that's maybe more interesting is, the saying, the light of day is the best disinfectant.
Yeah.
But that seems especially true for this kind of centralized, hyper-centralized institution that we're talking about.
Well, it feeds back into information theory. We have information networks that are much more sophisticated today than they were 30, 40, 50 years ago. If you look at the 90s, if you wanted to access the internet, you'd be doing it on a dial-up. For most people who could access it, and that would be not very many people, would have to access it on a dial-up modem, i.e. connecting to a phone line using speeds that were 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 times slower than what you can commercially acquire today. So the amount of information you could get and the number of sources of information were much fewer because fewer people could access the internet. And then the amount of information you could get from the internet per second was much less because the data transfer rate was much lower. So now we've matured the technology out. It's like, look at all these amazing news sources. Yeah, none of them are perfect, but we have lots of tools in place. If you can educate yourself, we have lots of tools to educate ourselves on how to detect good data and differentiate it from bad data. And that's the skill, I find, is how do you pick apart good data from bad data? And it's really difficult, actually. It's not as easy as it's not an easy skill. Why was I saying this? What was the question? Look how scatty I am when a newborn.
Well, no, this is great. I'll say it's incredible that the internet is 30 years old, or I don't know how old the internet is, but the point being, it's only been really a few years, and already the scale of both the levels of we can send encrypted messages with a reach that has is enormous compared to what it was during World War II.
But yes, here's the point: decentralization is not a new concept. If you think about that, we talk about decentralization in crypto like it's this brand new thing, but it's been around since the internet was born, and it's been around a lot longer, way before the internet. Decentralization as a concept. It's why in the UK you have county councils that manage local affairs rather than have a centrally planned authority micromanaging every aspect of every person's life everywhere for the area they claim domain over. It's not possible. Yes. You can't scale a central planned government in that way. Even if you built the most sophisticated information networks, all it takes is for the information being fed at any level to be inaccurate due to corruption, and then your whole centralized model falls apart. So yes, from a data theory point of view, centralized systems are bound to fail. They can keep growing, but they cannot scale. because they work on the assumption. If you use a centralized system, it works on the trust assumption. And the trust assumption is that all the data fed into your centralized system is accurate. But the reality is, all this, if you look at all the data fed into a centralized system, not all of it is accurate, because corruption exists, and corruption corrupts data. The purity of data transmission. It facilitates the transmission of lies. And the transmission of lies can get fed up the chain, and it has an amplifying effect. So, centralized data structures, they will tend and they will trend towards decentralized structures over time. And yes, because of ego, because of the will to power, yes, I got to quote a Nietzsche phrase, but because of the fundamental, because of ego built on insecurity, not ego built on selflessness, but ego built on insecurity. And ego built on insecurity is often ego built on a world perspective that lacks experience and diversity of experience and depth of experience. When you have an individual who has grown up with a very limited and fixed and very specific view of the world and has made no attempt to diversify their way of thinking or diversify the means through which, the filter through which they judge information that is received to them. And by that, what I mean is, look, I am privy to loads of information from loads of people, from loads of different sources about loads of different subjects. And it's up to me as the observer, as an individual, to say, to judge this information. But do I apply a moral judgment to it? Yes or no? Well, what I find is if I don't try to apply a moral judgment to the information that I'm receiving, then I'm less likely to unconsciously or consciously filter out information sources. And in doing so, I am just in receipt of a broader range of ideas and opinions. I encourage honesty. I encourage openness. But this is the underlying fault of people who cling to centralized structures, is that on some level, you're appealing to a despot who wants the world to be just like this, who wants the world to have a very specific shape, nature, and form, and never wants the world to change. Every time you appeal to a centralized structure, every time you try and cling to a centralized structure, that's secret. I feel like that's what you're saying. It's like, I don't want to change. I don't want to see the world in a new way or through a new. I just want to judge people. I want to judge things. Anything that's different that I don't understand, I don't want that in my life, because I'm centralized. I'm happy the way I am. I want the world. I want to keep my power, and I want the world to be the way it has to be. But the world tends towards decentralization. The richer you make your information networks, and that's an inevitability. And we see it every day. All you have to do is study. Is just look through the last, if you're older than 10, you have to just look back on your life. That's it. Your answer's there.
I'm reminded too of the Titan Prometheus that goes against the Zeus's Olympus, and he sort of symbolizes in those Greek myths, this constant challenging and progress and moving forwardness of things, as opposed to stagnating, like what you're articulating, I believe. So it's a very old idea as well.
Yeah, decentralization is fundamentally progressive in nature. And I'm not saying, you don't have to be progressive or woke, whatever. It is just, it veers towards exploration of ideas, dissemination of ideas, trading of information. That is what decentralization veers towards. So any advance in technology is fundamentally an advance in information sharing. And any advance in information sharing is an advance towards diversity. We can't hide from what's different, and we can't be afraid of change. I admit in my own, as I get older, I want the world to stay more static. I want the world to be more stable. I realize now, as I have a kid, one of the things that really strikes me is, I looked back on some of my colleagues who had kids way younger than me, and I'm like, I always think, I now understand why some of their, not all of them, but some of them, their worldview and their information base almost appears frozen in time, because it's like your focus suddenly stops and then the world keeps moving forward. because you've gotten into a very fixed pattern, a fixed job, a fixed lifestyle, a fixed routine, and you're not necessarily making a conscious effort to be aware of what's going on around you. You may enjoy the odd commercial application of technology that filters through the next version of the iPhone, a next iteration of gaming, which right now appears to be VR tech. Whatever, I can't really think of these examples, but if you're not paying close attention to current affairs, world events, technology developments, if you're not actively trying to expand your understanding and knowledge of information theory, your knowledge of core sciences, of how the world works, if you're not actively making an effort to understand how the world works, then a lot of time can very quickly pass by and the world changes in such a fundamentally big way while you've maintained this centralized perspective of yourself. And then you're terrified by how things have changed because you don't understand them. And because you don't understand them, that fear, it's natural. It's, fight or flight is the most basic response to being startled, to fear, to anxiety. And we all do that. That's what we see a lot of. That actually explains the great divide we have right now. We're moving towards a decentralized world. Diversity and information exchange is a fundamental deep part of that. But not everyone has embraced decentralization at the core of their character. I'm not even going to. I want to say that's arrogant and egotistical, but I feel I've done that more than other people have, but probably less than other people. But
Sure.
because I've made that conscious effort to decentralize my character, it means some of these changes, they're less surprising to me.
Mm-hmm. That is very Promethean.
Thank you. Last week I talked to you about, or last time I talked to you about machine elves. I'll give you another anecdote. Yes. Let's see. 2011, I talked about a 3-tier. I played Deus Ex, right? I just finished playing Deus Ex, and it blew my mind. 2011. I know it was a few years older than 2011, but that was when I played it, and it really occurred to me. I was like, you know what? We're going to have a 3-tier society one day. This is 2011. I was so excited by this idea that you'd have regular humans. You have 3 tiers: regular humans, then you'd have humans who are augmented, and then you would have this kind of this universal consciousness, a machine that was capable of absorbing the entire lifetime memories, personalities of humans, and then literally analyzing that and then mixing it and merging it with the personalities, lifestyles, memories, experiences, emotions of other humans that choose to merge with it. So almost like an AI type super network entity, which humans with the chip in their head say, right, I'm tired of being a human with a chip in my head. I've got my own distinct, unique entity, but I want to achieve immortality. I'm going to merge with this supermind. And in doing so, I'm going to donate and deliver and share and merge all of my memories, emotions, thoughts, experiences, feelings, perspectives of my entire lifetime into this supermind. And that supermind would control the world. And then you'd have this other class of people with chips in their brains. And then the modern day equivalent, what we currently don't view as monkeys, which is ourselves, because we don't have chips in our brain, they would effectively be like, monkeys. Because if you think about evolution and natural selection, there was a time, if you believe in evolution, if you believe in natural selection, and if you don't, stare at a microscope and look at bacteria dividing for a while, and then try and get back to me. But what I'm saying is, if you believe in that, then there was a time when, monkeys or various forms of monkeys were the dominant species, and they bred and they produce, and amongst their breeding, because, if you take 10 children, none of them are going to be exactly the same. Even if, if you father 10 children with the same partner, they're all going to be slightly different. So, okay, there's one that's different, but it happens to be a bit more human-like, and it happens to be really successful at surviving, so then goes and breeds. And it happens to breed, and it might have a tendency, like seeks like, so it might just kind of seek the other person that's really good at surviving. So, it's a stepwise evolution. We, in that phase, perhaps, I say, were we unconsciously, or can a monkey choose who it mates with? I'd argue, yeah,
I suppose
probably
that's
there's
sexual selection.
yeah, sexual selection. Is that conscious or unconscious? It's unconscious in one sense. It's conscious in a sense that, you know, you've got two organisms that choose to have sex and procreate. It's unconscious in this context of the consequences of that, in the sense that you produce offspring, but they are changed, and either they're better at adapting and surviving in there and improving their environment to facilitate survival of their species, or they're not. And sometimes when you produce something that's more adapted, or that's better at adapting and surviving and improving the survival of its species, it's kind of different. It's kind of fundamentally different from the other members of its species. And if it's, you know, if there's a drift towards that, then there's a drift towards fundamental change of a species over time. That's what evolution is. So it is both unconscious and conscious, is what I'm getting at. And we have kind of built, you know, when we talk about AI, it is almost in some ways, and this is where I would say, happy to have questions. By the way, sorry guys, those who are listening, you know, hand raised if you want to talk or ask questions and join in the conversation. Sorry, I didn't say that earlier, but what I'm trying to get at is, you know, when we talk about AI, we are, and this is really roundabout way, it feels like you're almost, it's like, are we centralizing our data networks or are we decentralizing them? Under this three-tier model, you know, you're preserving aspects of centralization and you're preserving aspects of decentralization, but you're fundamentally changing the nature of society and the nature of the human species as we know it. And you're consigning a form or a version of the human species to forever remaining third tier. And over time, the drift towards information networks, data sharing, increased frequency, data diversity, it will mean, you know, I'm not saying this is good or bad. It's a form of evolution. It's a form of evolution. You're evolving humans towards a particular direction and destiny. We are building our replacements, is what I'm basically getting at. You know, when you procreate, you are making your literal replacement. You know, when you build an AI, you know, the deep-seated fear that we all tap into is we've built our replacements that will replace us. And they're so different. We have no real understanding that they aren't us. And it's a really weird dichotomy. And why did I get into this? Why did I go down this rabbit hole? Because I was thinking about this stuff 10 years ago. And if you talked about this stuff with anyone 10 years ago, they'd think you were nuts. Now, it's not like...
Yes.
It's not like a crazy conversation to have. But how I got to that process was by maintaining an open mind and not judging, you know, saying something is good or bad, but just saying, let's just entertain the idea. Let's hypothetically look at how this could play out. Does it excite you? Separating your feelings about a subject from the subject itself. Yeah.
I think a good tie-in here would be there's a sort of as we say there's you know political evolution and you know this resilience that decentralized systems tend to have, and their resilience against the sort of unipolar you know old school ways of asserting and projecting power. I think that resilience that they have is a perfect example of why is it well adapted to, you know, why it makes sense to even talk of a decentralized nation state. I'm thinking of Balaji here. I think that's very resilience, and the encryption too, the anonymity of it.
Yeah, I think you need to preserve. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. The most free exchange of information is a private exchange of information. And my argument for that is if you have a conversation between two people who completely trust each other to the point that they can be completely open and honest with each other, then you will have a pure, free exchange of thoughts and ideas between those two individuals. introduce an unknown third party who is listening in. And if these two people know that a third party is listening in, or even if they can consider the possibility, if the possibility exists that a third person may be listening in, then the nature of that discussion between those two individuals, it may suddenly change. Those two individuals, they may self-censor because they may not want to say something that could then be taken out of, that could be recorded and then taken out of context and then used against them, or even not necessarily taken out of context, just used against them. I was just thinking what I was saying about we're building our replacements as AI spiel. I'm sure I probably said a bunch of things which could be snipped and taken out of context and used to portray me as some sort of evil monster. But that's what I'm saying to you is, it takes a lot of courage. It'll take a lot of snipping, but I can assure you in the last 5 minutes, I could see several things I've said that could probably be misquoted or quoted out of context and used to portray me as some kind of awful, awful man. But what I'm trying to get to you is if you can, and it takes a lot of courage then in that situation to have an open and honest discussion, because there's always the threat of violence against you or your ideas. And potentially against you on a fundamental level. As soon as you can encrypt that conversation, i.e. tunnel it off from the rest of the world in such a way that you can be safe and sure that there is no third party involved, you can maintain that line which allows you to maintain that openness. And you need that openness because you need to have free flow of information in order to have diversity of information. Without diversity of information, you can't have diversity of ideas. Without diversity of ideas, you don't have diversity of thoughts. Without diversity of thoughts, you don't have diversity of technology discovery and innovation. That's it. You need to have free speech to have creativity, and you need to have creativity to ultimately have innovation and to create new technologies that advance our species. And you need new technologies to create these, to increase our adaptability, because we need to be adaptable, and our flexibility, because you need to have adaptability and flexibility to survive in the modern, evolving, ever-changing world. And if you don't have adaptability and flexibility, then you're not going to survive. So if you have a society that is completely self-censoring at any level, but at the more levels at which you have a society that's self-censoring. So if you have a society that's completely self-censoring at every level, it is destined to fail. And the most obvious examples of that exist today. Afghanistan is the most obvious example of a failed state. North Korea is the most obvious example of a failed state. Iran is the most obvious example of a failed state because, you have so many layers at which censorship occurs. And so many layers at which, saying the wrong thing can lead to deadly punitive consequences. We have real existing, evidence of it. This isn't just like hypothetical theory. This is based on observation. This is, there are real examples of this. So you need privacy to do this. Otherwise, otherwise, what's the point? What's the point of having a decentralized system if you don't have privacy, at least on some level? Because, a completely decentralized state which has no privacy is almost as bad as a completely centralized state, in the sense that, if you can suppress ideas at every level, it may as well just be centralized because it is de facto centralized in a very real sense, or it will tend towards centralization. And actually, this is the other deep fear about AI. Going back to it, we're afraid of creating this single monopolar being, an AI, an AGI, that will then dictate how the rest of the world runs. I think that's part of the deep fear that's seated with AI, is that rather than having the decentralization we have, that we will trend back towards centralization. And that's the risk with AI, is that you build AIs and what you get is centralization. And actually the solution to that is to build multiple AGIs and have them compete with each other, and to make sure that you don't merge with these super sentiences. Because yes, we may build some AGI that we could merge with one day and that millions of people could merge with, but at the end of the day, you've still just got one centralized entity that's processing that information, and it's doing that within its own mind frame. It still needs independent thought. You still need ironically, division in order to maintain stability.
And something else I find ironic that I thought of before this discussion was the light of open source and the darkness of encryption. You know, I was thinking, is there some sort of dichotomy here at work? But I think it's in both cases. I think you said it very well. It's for the sake of innovation, and it's for the sake of progress, and of not stalling behind, and being subject to all those things you described, those negative things.
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, it will always be. You will always have some degree of centralization in systems, because centralization, you know, there are many ways in which systems can be centralized. I've been really thinking hard. I'm kind of, this is again something where you could probably misquote me out of context, but I'm kind of like unity through plurality is something that I've become is something that I'm a believer of. The idea of we can have unity through plurality rather than through singularity. I think there are a lot of people that idolize and praise the idea of a singularity, but really deep down, you're just saying we want a God. We want a single centralized entity that will control us all. And the reality is we know the consequences of that already. Historically, just look, give yourself a centralized despot that thinks they're a God. Look how everyone else suffers from that. There's plenty of examples. It just leads to abuse of power. It leads to no one really being happy, because you're just seeing the world, or you're ruling the world through one person's lens. It's unity through plurality is this idea that actually we have multiple systems that understand each other and understand that we're different, but accept that and understand why, and make the effort to understand why we've come from where we are, why we've come to be the way we've been. They may not want to be us, okay? I don't necessarily want to live my life like certain people. It's like, okay, I don't want to live my life like this person at all, but I just accept that they're there. And as long as it's the non-aggression principle, I really like the fact that Javier Milei, he talks about non-aggression principle. I love it. He's like one of the most.
The NAP.
He is. Even though we have our differences of opinion, I can't help. He's just so articulate. But the NAP, the non-aggression principle, is at the core of libertarianism. It's the core of what enables a decentralized society to exist. You know, it is okay, I may be a maxi for something, but I'm not going to impose my maxiness on other people by force. You know, I'm just going to try and, I'll try talking them into it. You know, that's fine. You should probably use the Particl marketplace because it's the best fucking marketplace on the planet if you really think about it. And yeah, we got some work to do. Plug of the week, Particl marketplace on Particl, Particl.io, not the PsyOps operation Particl.com. That's possibly a scam or a PsyOps, I don't know. Or maybe it's an honest mistake. Maybe they didn't Google us, they decided to run their startup. That is the complete opposite of what we do. But or basicswapdex.com. Thank God we got the .com on that one. Now we'll make PsyOpsing a bit harder. But what was I saying? Remind me what I was saying.
You were discussing. Well, I think you were discussing libertarian principles and how they really do lend themselves to progress and innovation.
I think the non-aggression principle lends itself really well to decentralization. I think privacy and encryption lend themselves really well to true decentralization, or to decentralization that is more immune to corruption. I mean, people make this argument that, if you can have private encrypted communications, then you can use it to carry out nefarious activities. But actually, if you don't, then you can have third parties censoring, everyone. And that in turn is probably a worse crime, because you're committing the ultimate, I think, the only real thought crime is suppressing people from having the thoughts they want to have. There's a very real difference between thoughts and actions. Actions have consequences, but private thoughts don't necessarily have consequences. And privately shared thoughts.
That ties in beautifully with what you said 2 weeks ago about authenticity.
Yeah, exactly. I think I work as a healthcare. I have, let's see, it's insane how many years I've been a doctor for. You know what? I see a lot of mental health stuff, and the one thing I always think is like, it's not everyone, by the way, but it's like, if you didn't have so many taboos in your head, you wouldn't be so anxious all the time. That's just, you have these conversations with people, and if I was like, if your worldview wasn't so fixed and rigid, you wouldn't be so anxious about this. Or if you understood it from this perspective, you wouldn't be so anxious. If you had a more open mind and you were less taboo about certain things, then you wouldn't be so neurotic. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a really neurotic person in lots of ways. I've now made myself, I'm addicted to information. Like, I'm really like, oh yeah, feed it to me. Give me all the information you got. I can't like sit in a room and not do anything, because it's important for me to know what's going on and to expand. But it's way better than doing the opposite. It makes me less vulnerable to exploitation. It makes me less vulnerable to abuse. It makes me less vulnerable to being screwed over and fucked around. I have so many of my colleagues, by the way, who are getting fucked around, screwed over, and abused because they put their faith in a system that told them that if you go to medical school and you'll wind up practicing as a doctor, and if you give a good 10, 15 years, you're going to have a job which will pay you well enough to actually live a good life. And now half of these guys are now entering situations where they can't afford their mortgages, they can't afford to feed their families, and they're having to fuck off to other countries just to basically make ends meet. So the system has betrayed them. Ironically, because, I got a couple of colleagues who tell me that they've got huge tax bills from HMRC because they put money into pension pots, and because of changes to pension pot rules that they weren't really aware of or never really understood, that now they're liable to huge bills to HMRC. So, if you're not paying attention to what's going on around you, the world will find ways to screw you over. And if
especially
you're not actively,
the centralized world. Yes.
Yeah, the centralized world will find ways to screw you over. And so this is the whole thing. I would rather be someone that is addicted to information and to diversity of information than the opposite. Ignorance is bliss. That's great until you're stepped on and squashed. It's that simple. Read Animal Farm. Well, ignorance is bliss if you're a sheep, but wait till a wolf comes along. So,
well said.
That's my take on all of this. I think we're coming up to like an hour. Is that right? I can go on if you want, but feel free. It
seems like resilience. A good. Yes, absolutely. But it seems like if anybody in the audience right now wants to say something, you're more than welcome to. You can raise your hand. As last time, this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. Let me just see right quick. Doesn't seem like we have any hands, but
I want to joke. It'll be uploaded to our YouTube channel for all of 5 people to listen to. I'm just going to say.
Oh, it actually got decent exposure here on Twitter, on YouTube, the last one, which was quite interesting.
Really? All right, fair enough.
Well, no, not several hundreds, but yes.
Okay, fine. I mean, I'll accept that. But if the listen count goes above 10 on the YouTube, I will be amused, pleasantly surprised. No, I'm just self-deprecating here. What I'm basically
you're at 45.
I'm at 45.
For 2 weeks ago, yes.
Dang. Well, I'd better maintain my resilience and keep on going for the next one. Come in with low expectations. But that's what I wanted to say is, that whole theme of resilience, it's really important. What was I getting at? It is that idea of if you are decentralizing yourself, decentralizing your mind frame, decentralizing your judgment process, then actively pursuing the growth of your information theory and field and knowledge base in all areas, then you are making yourself more resilient over time, because you can anticipate challenges, because every time you get knocked down, it's not that you're emotionally wounded and asking why. It's not that you've got some taboo in your head that is stopping you from finding the right answer or getting closer to reality, because reality is a consensus definition at the end of the day. Reality, but within a species, it is a consensus process. and reality within one social group may not conform to reality within another, but certain consensus groups override others because the practical implications are just so much more severe. And on a fundamental level, there are certain discoveries, particularly the discoveries that go against the grain of all established and identified consensus. When you find an observation in reality that goes against all known consensus that cannot be explained, that is potentially the route to a new consensus reality, a new exploration, a new innovation. So, it
this
is
highlights the importance of unregulated data dissemination that you were mentioning earlier.
Yeah, it is, because yes, you'll get lots of inverted commas bad data, quote, that's the wrong phrase, bad, but you'll get lots of data that is, arguably junk, or isn't necessarily useful, or is potentially going to cause harm to you. But at the same time, you've got the potential to access data that's useful. So, like I said, it comes down to these consensus realities. Being able to understand them enables you to build your own resilience.
You cannot let the zeitgeist dictate what is useful information for you. That's a judgment that every individual in here has to make for themselves.
Exactly.
And it's your responsibility to.
Exactly, because if you allow that zeitgeist to, imagine we were having this discussion in the 1600s. Well, it wouldn't have been possible in the 1600s. But for exactly that same reason, are we going to execute this guy because he said 5 + 5 = 10? Fucking hell. Let's stop and think for a minute. Non-aggression principle here. Sorry. In our own minds. Sorry, I was going to say, yeah. Anyway, honestly, what you said about... Or the
sun around the earth there, yes.
Yeah, but yeah, what you've said pretty much nails it, is we can't let the zeitgeist dictate us. Yeah. Anyway, go back. Well, you've listened to it, but everyone else here, if any of this, go back and listen to this twice or thrice. Just just share it around. It's really.
I think this is a great spot to end it for sure. We all have a responsibility, and I think if we all strive towards the right things, and I think decentralization, encryption, and how resilient those things are in the face of control for the sake of progress and innovation, I think our political ideas here have a real chance to succeed and evolve in this in this evolutionary sort of marketplace of ideas.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Cap, as always. And you'll be on the privacy roundtable with Firo, Basic Swap, Particl, and PivX in 1 week from now on Sunday the 28th.
Yes, and I believe we'll be having Beam, hopefully, as our special guest. So, yeah, looking forward to it.
Awesome. I am very much looking forward to that. As always, everybody listening to this, please check out Particl.io, Particl, the Particl Marketplace, of course, and Basic Swap Dex on Twitter. We are also on YouTube. And thank you very much for being here, Cap.
No worries, and have a good weekend, Cangrejo.
Thank you. Thank you very much.